Today we get to answer a listener question about communication in marriage. We love when you guys submit your questions. We like hearing where you're coming from. And we do pray that the Lord is richly blessing your families and your marriages. We admire your humility and the way that you guys are always learning and growing. And so hopefully we can add some insight to this conversation, because communication is something that you don't just learn once and you have it in the bag. It's something that we are always learning and growing in. If you guys enjoy this podcast, if you give it a thumbs up, if you're watching on YouTube, if you subscribe wherever you are listening or watching, and share it with a friend if you find it encouraging. That is how this podcast gets out to more people. And we also want to thank you guys for everyone who has taken the time to write a rating or a review.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
So this has been one of those weeks where it's a huge week, but it's one of those weeks where everything comes together. At least a lot of things are coming together, I feel like. And I don't know what it is. Like, there's those weeks where you just feel like you're setting yourself up maybe and like trying to get a result, but you don't get to experience the fruit of your labors. And stuff just starts moving and momentum's on your side. And I feel like they've kind of been pushing a rope for a few weeks. And it just feels like, I mean, it's been good, but it's been like hard. Like, you don't have momentum, but you have fulfillment. And it feels like we have momentum, which is really awesome.
Yeah, so you feel like you're starting to reap from some of all the seeds you've planted?
Yeah, exactly. And closing some chapters that have been open for a long time, and that feels good. And anyways, yeah, so it's fun to see that progress with the kiddos' school, with the building progress being made, with just to feel like you and I, our flow and projects we're finishing up together. And then, you know, you just now told our dog Place to go sit on his blanket, and he went back and he sat down on his blanket. We've been working so much with him. So anyways, it's rewarding.
Yeah, it really is rewarding. And once again, there is a lot of construction noise in the background, if you guys are picking up on that. It's not gunshots. It's not anything else that might concern you. It's actually very constructive work. It is actual construction work being done.
Although I am curious if you guys can hear anything, because I mentioned that last time with the tractor when I thought it was so noisy. It was noisy for us, but it wasn't noisy for you guys.
Nice. Well, there you go.
Sorry, can you hear? Oh.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, you just kept staring at my mic. I'm like, what's going on? What's wrong?
Nailed it.
It's crazy. All the colors are changing. I feel like it changed between last night and today. Maybe it's just we set up in a different spot. Like out in front of us, it's like golden and it's beautiful.
I did move to be in more shade, and then the last couple episodes we've recorded, we've had to go to the tent because of weather and rain and stuff. And so it does look a little bit different than last time we were out here recording.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, so you want to go first? Do you want to bring up a question?
Sure, I'll bring up a question. How do you work on communication with a spouse? Me and my husband have been married for 8 years and struggle with communication. Most of our arguments and misunderstandings are from lack of communication or bad tones during communication, lack of listening, etc. It makes it hard to even talk about dreams and future plans when it feels like you aren't being heard and understood. It's something we both want to work on, but we don't know where to start and how to learn that skill. Thanks.
This is a really good thing to start talking about now.
This is a really good thing to start talking about.
I think I said this is a.
No, I'm sure you did. Sorry. I like to hear some things that aren't even there.
I don't know, since we're recorded. We can actually check. But I do mess up my words sometimes.
Not as often as I do. I listen back to our podcast, and I do this in my writing as well. I just leave out, you know how like people will miss a word? I leave out multiple words in one sentence. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, but your writing's so good. It makes up for it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, but I will say this. So it's awesome you're addressing this now, because if you've been married for 8 years, you don't want to not be able to talk about dreams and goals with your spouse and vision and aligning. And you don't want every conversation to be painful, even if it's a fun one, because how long can you make that work? There are people that make it work for decades and decades, and it's so painful, and it's just going to get more and more and more painful because you have to go through more and more and more conversations. So it's wonderful that you're like, okay, what do we do here? And I do think communication is something ongoing that you learn with your spouse. It's definitely not a place that I feel I've arrived at with Elisha. He's so gracious in his communication with me, but I just feel like I feel like we're honestly pretty good at communication. We communicate through a lot of stuff, and I feel like we communicate respectfully and get our point across. I feel heard and understood, I should say. I can't speak for Elisha.
Oh, yeah, likewise.
For the most part,
Likewise.
I feel heard and understood in our marriage, and that's a big part of intimacy in your marriage. So there's a couple of things that come to mind that might be helpful. I don't know what you would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome that you and your husband both want to improve in this area. That's a win right there. And I think having not just the humility to acknowledge that you need work in your communication, but then also the willingness to grow is paramount. Because I think when you're married, I'm sure this can happen at any point in a marriage, is you can just assume that this is what it is. Like, it's going to be this way forever. And you start almost kind of compartmentalizing. You start creating compartments in which you can place different areas of your life, and you can emotionally detach, you can, spiritually detach. And I think we've been in danger of doing this at various seasons, where I'll think to myself, man, we're not, like, you already used the expression, this was like pushing a rope. Like, this feels like pushing a rope every time we have this conversation. Why don't we just avoid it for the rest of our life? How about that? Or I'm not able to, talk about what the Lord's teaching me or what he showed me in his Bible without, my spouse feeling like I'm preaching at them. Or we can't talk about money without it becoming a fight. We can't talk about, homeschooling or education. Like, there's a bunch of topics that can become hot topics. Probably some are more likely than others, right? Money, sexual intimacy, children, child training, things like that, I think are more significant topics, and so they can prompt more emotion. But the fact that you want to do this is, I think, huge, because I guess we are optimists, and I want to remain optimists in our marriage and just in life. Because I do think that, like, the Lord works. Like, when he works in people's marriages, he works in people's lives, and just the fact that he has done this great work of saving our souls and bringing us from darkness and into light. And I truly think that he, and I think the Bible articulates this clearly, like, he wants to continue to grow us, to sanctify us, to mature us. And especially if your spouse is a believer, there's so much hope for the future, right? Like, if you feel laden by burdens now, whether they're created by yourself, sin that it's indwelling, there's hope for freedom. Like, we actually get freedom from that sin, and it's the same for your spouse. And it's so something like communication is something I think you can have hope in, and it's something that you should pursue growth in all of the time, and not settle or not become complacent.
Well, I think the thing is that why we always have to be growing in marriage is because the circumstances are always changing. So maybe finances weren't an issue for you, and then all of a sudden you have to cut back on expenses, and now you're disagreeing on where the money goes. Or I feel like we've experienced all of these different things in different times in our life. Okay, physical intimacy is great, and then you go through a season where it's not, and you're like, we've never had to navigate communicating through this. Or maybe someone's ego, or I say ego, but it's just like self-esteem or something like that, is sensitive. So then you bring up a topic that you used to be able to bring up just fine, and it goes totally south and goes the wrong way, right? I think Elisha and I both have experienced that. We'll like say something, I just start crying. He's like, what's going on? Or I'll say something, and I notice he's sensitive to that topic, and it's like, what? So I think that we constantly have to be learning and adjusting and being sensitive to our spouse, because that's going to look different. It's not like you can just check a box and be like, we communicate great, and never have to continue growing in this area. It's something all marriages are continually growing in.
Yeah. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to continue growing. And I want to continue growing, because you that's exactly right. Like, and I think of how fast our life has changed from the time we got married, right? We were married, then we were pregnant on our honeymoon. So we're having to communicate through, all of a sudden we're communicating through like morning sickness and nausea, and that affecting our schedule in a way. And then obviously the full pregnancy, and then I'm not making a lot of money at the time when we first get married. So I'm working like 3 jobs, and taking kind of any side work that I can get. And I'm committing to like weekend, blind installation jobs with my friend's company without checking with you, and there's just so much, I guess, fodder for dissension and for discord and for poor communication, and being able to, I guess, in that season, have the other take the other person. What is it? What am I trying to say? To like give them the benefit of the doubt,
This
right?
is huge.
Because
in marriage.
especially, I can only speak from my perspective. Like, it's not. I think of some of those early things, taking open houses as a realtor, going and installing mailboxes, even, and saying yes to a bunch of things without checking with you sometimes. And then there goes our weekend. There's tons of, I guess, room for you to take that personally, and then me get defensive and be like, I'm doing this for you, right? And I think oftentimes that is the unfortunate thing about miscommunication and just, bad communication is it doesn't, like, the original intent was good, right? The original sentiment towards the other person could have even been could have been very kind towards them, but it's received in the wrong manner. And so, yeah, it's just such a, you want to work on it. And I remember that time and time again. I mean, even just this last fall, this most recent fall, the current fall, the fall that we're in right now, remembering that kind of jarring feeling of when you kick into school mode with the kids and being like, this is okay, whoa, and realizing I need to communicate differently with the new schedule and the new order of things, and realizing that, man, like, each year is probably going to feel that way because our kids are going to develop, like, the complexity of our life is going to increase. Man, communicating through this build has been quite the ride, right? Between you and I, it's been really good for our strengthening for our marriage, because, I mean, it's been challenging, but I think ultimately it's been strengthening because we've wanted to communicate well through this. Anyways, we haven't really answered the question.
Well, yeah. So when I think about tools that are practical, I mean, it's awesome. You're hitting the nail on the head with, often it's just the body language or the tone, and then the other person doesn't receive it well. So it's not so much what you say, it's how you say it. That's a very true cliche. And we just did an interview with my Uncle Wade, and he brought something that my grandpa told him, and that is, if you want to go and confront someone, then it's probably not, like, you're probably not right in your heart to do it. You should wait until it grieves you to confront that person and then go and have that discussion. And I think how much can be gained if we come into conversations with the right heart posture toward our spouse, wanting to get on the same page, wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt, telling ourselves before we go in a conversation, like, instead of like, I'm sure he thinks this and he wants this and blah, 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 thinking, okay, I'm sure he has my best interest at heart. He wants to serve our family in this way. We both want the same things. Going over what's uniting us, what are the things we're appreciating about our spouse, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they aren't out to just antagonize us and push our buttons. And then when we can honestly have that heart posture, go into the conversation, seeking unity. Because I think that if we go in aggressively, then usually the other person's going to respond with aggression. And this is something I'm really grateful to Elisha for, is he doesn't do that. And I've had to learn to be less aggressive going into conversations, because I would just come in, guns blazing, and Elisha in his wisdom would shut the conversation down because he's like, this is not going anywhere profitable.
Well, on the flip side of that, I've really had to learn how to have a conversation even when everything in me doesn't want to have it, which, I mean, like, I'm sure many husbands can relate to that feeling of like, whoa, like, are we really talking about this right now? I do not feel like doing this. And so even though I wouldn't yell, you said, blow up or raise my voice or anything like that, I would just kind of mentally shut down and check out. Maybe I'd be present physically, but, like, the spirit had departed. And so I've really had to grow in being willing to talk when I don't feel like talking, right? Just being like, okay, I get it. Like, if you want to talk about this, and at the very least, say, hey, like, this just is not a good time for me to have this conversation. Even saying that, I feel like, was progress for me, and was helpful to our communication. I mean, I don't know, you could say if it was or
huge.
it was not.
Yeah, whatever spouse is the one that is more likely to shut a conversation down, letting them know, hey, I'm going to need some time to think about this, but we will circle back.
Yes.
It's huge for the other person. So if you've heard me mention it once, you might have heard me mention it 1,000 times, and that is the Get It All Done Club. But as we are going into fall and we are establishing new systems and new routines, maybe we are homeschooling for the first time, or we're just trying to make everything click in our homes, I want to let you know about the Get It All Done Club. Thousands of women have been through the program, and this year, instead of just having a lot of video content where I walk you through the systems and routines that I have used from having 3 children, 2.5 and under, to now pregnant with my 6th, I have added so much content this year that is done for you content, because I know that you are super busy in your life. So this year I've added so many templates, both digital on Canva and Trello. I've added and physical, so things that you can just print out directly, things for your foundational threshold, things for your foundational pantry, things to systematize planning your week. There are just so many things that I've created for you. So it's not just me talking to you, but hopefully I'm saving you hours of time. And there's also an incredible godly community of other women that are learning the same things and applying the same things in their home that is off social media that you could ask advice to. I love going live in there once a month with you guys, and I hope that you join us this fall. It's an incredible time to take the momentum of the season and throw it into thriving in motherhood in your homes that wants to have the conversation right now in the moment.
Right. And so again, yeah, it's not like I was good. Like my strength was also my weakness, right? Like I could stay level-headed. I wouldn't get emotional, but at the same time, I would also just mentally check out and be like, see, okay, like keep talking. Like I'll keep, I'll think about whatever I want to think about.
Well, it was good. The Lord blessed us in marriage that we weren't the exact same. We didn't communicate the exact same way. And so we've encouraged each other to grow in those ways. Something that really, really has helped us is in Marriage Maximizer, which is my parents' marriage course. They talk about something called the one-way conversation. And this is an adaptation from the Courageous Conversation, which you can find online. It has a million questions to it. It's a lot of questions. And it really is just like 3 or 4 that I feel like are super, super helpful to get to the root of an issue when you're circling back to the same topic over and over and over with your spouse. And it's like, we never go anywhere with this topic. And Elisha and I had a few of those early on in marriage. And I say early on, we're 3 years into marriage and it's the same topic we can't bring up. The same thing happens. It's like you hit the same wall, the same reaction happens. You shut down or you blow up or whatever the case may be. And it's like, it's this circular pattern and you start to feel a little hopeless because it's like, we've had this conversation so many times. It never goes anywhere. It's always hurtful. We never feel understood by each other. And so this conversation really helps where one person, they say, don't blame, complain, or explain or something. And you're just the one asking the questions of the other person. And there's a couple things that really stick out to me. One is just asking, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Is there anything else? And not taking your spouse's first response as anything, because often the root lies way below their first response. Their first response might be emotional. It might be an attack at you. It might be a guard. It might be totally defensive. And then as you keep asking, is there anything else? It lets them continue to go and go and go. Maybe they just need to verbally process and they don't even know what's driving them nuts. Mm-hmm. So that's huge. And I think another thing that's really helped in communication is repeating back. Mm. And we do this a lot, not even officially in a conversation. When we feel like the other person is like, okay, this conversation, I'm not sure we're seeing eye to eye on. Repeating back what you think you hear the other person saying and be like, okay, I hear you saying this. Say it back. And often this happens way more than I wish, way more than I wish happened in our communication. Elisha will be like, no, like, and then he'll re-say it. And then I'm like, okay, so this? He's like, no. Like, I feel like we just had one of those conversations at the picnic table the other day where we were just like going back and forth and like, I wasn't getting it. And it wasn't like a big conversation. It wasn't a big hot topic, but I just kept trying to summarize what he was saying. And I was like totally wrong.
I'm way guilty of this, is I jump to the conclusion before you'll start talking and I'll be like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about, this, that, or the other. And you're like, no, that's not at all what I'm talking about. But that's what's really nice about that one-way breakthrough conversation or the courageous conversation, which you can find online. Also, Katie's parents did a free Masterclass on marriage, which really I think has a bunch of communication tools as well, and we'll link that down below. The nice thing is it gives you the framework, and you really just follow the rules. Like you both come to it, you agree to go play by the rules, and like you said, it's laid out, and they tell you the lines to say. The person gets done venting or talking, and then you say, okay, what I hear you saying is, and then you try to reiterate it, and they get to as many reps as possible to keep going. When you say, is there anything else? Is there anything? You keep asking that until they truly say no, like that's it, and then you can move on in the topics. And so it's been a really helpful tool. And then this like sounds so trite and simple, but it's been, I think, helpful for us. Is another tool that we use is like our motivation. What do we call it? The motivation probability assessment, right? Like one of those tools I came up with in the growth initiative, which is really helpful. But this tool really highlights the reality of how we feel at different parts in the day and at different and during different days of the week, because both you and your spouse, regardless of how committed you are to communicating effectively with each other, to communicating in a loving way with each other, you're going to have times during your day and times during the week where you are less likely to be communicative in an effective way, and you are going to be a little bit more on edge. You're more likely to get triggered, and I think you can just be honest with that. And we've gotten better at that. Like I wish I was better at managing my like blood sugar, my caloric intake, so that an hour before dinner we could talk about anything. But that's just like, it's not a good time for either of us really to talk about anything of significance. And in fact, like we like seeing each other always. We always love seeing each other, but that is a time where historically we've like tried to almost like be distracted. I mean, Katie's usually working hard to prepare a meal at that point, but also kind of like take the kids and go elsewhere, because it's like, it's just not, again, it's not like it's terrible.
Sounds like we can't hang out around each other.
Of course we can, but what happens sometimes is you end up getting into a deeper conversation than what you have business being in with how you feel, nutrients wise and like calorically. And so that's just like being wise, right? I think, and the same thing, there is, and we'll have to look it up. It's like not letting the sun go down upon your wrath, right? Is that a proverb, or is it? And,
yeah.
And I'll have to look at the context, because I certainly don't want to speak against the Bible. But I feel like we had so many counterproductive conversations because we were so tired and so fatigued, and we could not see things clearly. And we went to sleep, and sleep and rest like solved so many of the issues, right? And you get up. And so I'm not trying to counter that verse, because I get it. And I think maybe it's like you need to reconcile with God in your heart is probably a good thing. I know it's talking about another person, but just like trying to, again, don't let the sun go down upon your wrath, get right in your heart before the Lord. But if you're in a tough conversation, maybe even just agree that you're not going to bed. You're not letting the sun go down on your wrath. So agree to that. Be like, okay, it's time. But then also agree, like, we should go to sleep, and then come at this again, with a cup of coffee, after some sleep. And so I don't know.
Well, I want to mention one thing for that verse. I think that what's been really helpful for us is just not bringing stuff up when we're getting ready for bed. So I used to think, I have Elisha's full attention, or I used to think, I ought to just clear this up real quick before we go to bed. Like check off this to-do list conversation before bed. And it's like, no, those conversations do not get brought up. And if you don't bring up those conversations right before bed, then you aren't dealing with being in the situation of the sun going down on your wrath, because you just don't get mad. So just like, I feel like now being like, okay, if there's any possible way this can wait till tomorrow, it won't even get brought up until tomorrow. And then I do feel like we have just learned that when we are really upset at each other and like really angry and it's really late, we just need to go to bed and be like, hey, we'll talk about this in the morning, and kind of work through it on our own. There have been so many times we've woken up in the morning, just gone straight to the other person and been like, I'm so sorry. Like, I do not know what I was thinking last night. And we both say the same thing. We like both apologize and it's over. Like there's no conflict. Yeah. And we were just really wiped out, and everything's a really big deal at night.
It is.
So choose your timing wisely. Like choose your timing wisely, choose your wording, your attitude, your heart posture when you're going to go into those conversations, and then have a framework. This conversation, I guess, serves as kind of a moderator for you to get to places and conversations that you've never had. And some people, if you have a spouse that you've never felt understood by, or like very, very, very rarely, and you're still not feeling understood in this conversation, then I would encourage you to get a moderator, because you don't want this to keep going. You need to have breakthroughs in this communication area. For your kids' sake, for your sake, for everyone's sake, you need to learn how to communicate. And so asking your spouse, hey, who is someone that we can bring in to help us moderate this conversation? My parents have done that for a lot of couples, and it's interesting to see what couples, they're sitting there as the moderator going like, wow, like this person is never hearing what this person's saying, but there's a third person in the room, or a couple, a godly Christian couple in the room, that's able to help facilitate one person not just getting tromped all over. And some marriages need that. They need the reps with someone else there. And I would say that this is often, I think, way more effective than like going to a counseling session or something like that. It's having someone just be there and back up whoever needs to be backed up in that conversation. So anyways, those are some things that I would really encourage and that have been a big blessing to us in our marriage.
And something I love, the fact that Katie's parents, are marriage coaches, gives us fun insight, because we get to hear all these testimonies and stories of people that have been married for 42 years and just have incredible breakthrough in their communication capabilities, and get to enjoy the fruit of that, right? Moving forward in their marriage. And so, yeah, again, we are optimists, but I do think Christians should be optimists, right? Like we get to hope in Christ. We get to look forward to what he has in store for us. And I do think growing as Christians, growing as communicators, growing as people that know how to love our spouses better. And this is something that's great too about, again, going back to, and since we're talking about Marriage Maximizer, taking that 100% responsibility. And like, the fact is that you can't always control, what you should do is and I've heard this said in communication, it's not just taking responsibility for what you say, but also for what's heard, right? For what's understood. Because I think that this is a common thing just in communication in general, is like, oh, they got offended, they got hurt. Well, nothing I said was offensive. I wasn't trying to offend them. That's on them. Rather than a good communicator takes that responsibility and being like, oh my goodness, I clearly communicated something that was offensive. Like, that's on me. And going that extra length, I mean, like, wow, okay, how was that offensive? Like, and I mean, not saying it like maybe like that, but just realizing that if somebody is offended, taking that to heart and being like, oh man, I did not want to do that. I really need to figure out why, because to me, the words weren't offensive. Maybe it was my body language, the whatever. Anyways.
Yeah, this is huge because, and we aren't going to communicate exactly how our spouse communicates. We aren't going to receive things how they do with their specific set of, their history and their childhood, and like how we interpret things. We have our own lenses through how we interpret things. And so you want to learn how your spouse interprets things. And this is so much easier said than done. I feel like, especially when it comes to like respect for a husband, my mom has a great piece of advice, and that is ask your husband, hey, how can I respect you? Or how is this disrespectful? Like, what is disrespectful to you? Or like just going straight to your husband and asking him, because I think a lot of women, what we think is respectful or disrespectful is not how a male interprets that. And I think that there's things that go both ways with gender stereotypes, and then each person is individual outside of those stereotypes. And we really want to learn our spouses. And that's the beauty of marriage, is it is a lifelong learning process. And the best marriages never stop learning about their spouse, because their spouse is changing over time. Elisha's changing. He's growing. He has new stresses. He has new capabilities. And I need to continually learn who he is. And sometimes it takes me off guard. I feel like we've been through so much together, and like I still don't know you the way I want to. But I also think that that's the beauty of a relationship with a human being, is that, and with God, is we're always seeking and searching and looking to know more.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, I'm so grateful that you have that heart and that mindset, and I want to have that too, and just continuing to know you, to learn you, to adapt, as you adapt, because, I mean, Lord willing, we get to live here on this earth for, many more decades, Lord willing, and we get to be with our spouse. Hopefully we live a lot more years with our spouse than without our spouse, right, here on this earth. And it's what a privilege And that's one of those blessings that maybe for seasons it takes faith to trust the Lord to be like, no, this was a good idea, that he had one woman for one man, and that covenant is to never be broken, and you get to be, you get to be forever with that person. It's never been hard for me to believe that that's a blessing. I've always loved our marriage, but I know that it can be challenging for different marriages in different seasons. But then to have some perspective looking down the road, and you think 30, 40, 50 years down the road, and having all of that shared experience and having worked through hardships and trials, and then the Lord willing to have fruit from your marriage, and children and grandchildren, and you get to enjoy that with someone. Oh, man, what a gift. And you think of not having that, when a marriage is terminated, and especially, like say they've got children, it's terminated. Now you don't get to share in that blessing with the other person. Isn't that just such a tragedy? I mean, not only is the termination of the marriage itself a tragedy, and it's sad, and it breaks God's heart, and it wasn't the intent at all. Now just in your later years, it's like this person that you made all these children with, that hopefully you're pouring your heart and soul into, and then they're having children. You don't get to with them enjoy that blessing. And so it is so worth investing into that relationship for years to come, and every day, hopefully. Man, what a gift marriage can be when you just keep investing into it. I sometimes wonder too, in marriage, if communication, I know this has happened in our marriage, where it's that whole, like, you're just too serious about everything. And even, I'm not saying that this is the case with this lady that's having a hard time communicating with her husband, and they both want to grow, because it's great that they both want to grow. But she says, even talking about the future and dreams is hard, because she doesn't feel like she's being heard and understood. And, dreams in the future is actually, like, it's fun, but it's also kind of significant, right? That can be a very heavy thing. If it's, I think it can be, like, dreams are a big deal. Like,
especially if you're unaligned and your dream's going to heavily affect your spouse. Like, it probably is.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah.
Hopefully it is going to heavily affect your spouse.
Because I think this has happened with you and I, where we couldn't talk about the future very much with each other during different seasons, because our visions for it were not quite aligned. And it was a very tense point, or tense subject in our life, in a way that I think was very helpful to our marriage. Because, I mean, obviously you want to get aligned on your future vision for your family. And that's like a whole other probably topic, is just aligning your values, your vision, your goals. If you have children, then hopefully you're going to be able to talk about their education, their development, their discipleship, and you really get to kind of game plan around that, and unite around that. And that's the blessing of children, because there is the danger that people talk about of becoming a child-centric home, where it's like children dictate everything that the home does, and you almost kind of idolize the children to a fault. But I do think there is a blessing that God intended in that. Obviously children are a blessing, but I think there's a blessing for marriages when children come into the picture, because it's something that you can just so unite around. Right? It is this clear thing that it is you. Like, this is us right now, that we made this child. And here in the 21st century, it's so easy to get into a marriage, and for the guy to have his life, and for the woman to have her life. And even though, like, on paper they're married, and they're married before God, they don't even, like, act like it. Like, they sleep in the same bed, they live in the same house, but they've got just parallel lives. And children are a way to really give you that undeniable, this is now our life. And you have that visible, I guess, tangible thing to be like, we need to unite on this. But anyways, I was just going to mention, dreams in the future, that doesn't necessarily, mean it's lighthearted or easy. And you could even back up from that and go lighthearted, go fun, go hobbies, go shared interests, and just start with that. Be like, that's right. You guys liked each other at some point, right? You guys probably still do like each other, and you enjoyed being with each other at some point. If you got married, there was something there that was enjoyable. And trying to rediscover those things can kind of spark a new communication.
Yeah, especially if you guys are listening to different people or growing in different areas at different times and different rates, that can really put a strain on your communication. If you don't have a healthy colander system for processing information in your marriage, and you're just dumping tons of information in it. Maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're getting tons of different ideas, and you bring them to your husband, and he's like, what on earth? Like, this is nuts, and he's listening to someone else, and you don't understand why he's listening to who he is listening to. So I think sometimes when we're learning and growing a lot, it puts an extra pressure on the communication to be able to process those things quickly with your spouse and be able to either apply them to your life or throw them out or see what fits for you. And so like Elisha said, just maybe going away from those things and thinking, okay, I just need to learn my spouse specifically. We need to have fun together. I think of the 5 things like his needs, her needs. It's a great book to read. And because it's going down to what a man needs and what a woman needs on a stereotypical level. Okay, so you can disagree with this, but this is just the findings from secular and Christian marriages when it comes to men and women on average. A man needs, and this is not in order, but he needs something like physical intimacy.
Something like it. Yeah.
Something like
Ideally,
that. Something that looks a lot like sex. Okay. That companionship.
I think it's recreational.
I was going to say there's a term for that. Recreational companionship. So, I mean, this is something that maybe your husband, he just like wants to have a good time with you, and you guys haven't gone out on a date or you haven't done any hobby or shared any interests for a while, and everything's just been so practical. I know it can really get that way with children coming into the picture, which is wonderful, but also you need to remember that like, hey, we just like hanging out, and maybe he just really wants you to hang out with him instead of always be trying to get somewhere in the conversation, right? Do you remember some of the domestic support?
Nice.
Domestic support. A physically attractive spouse. Just, I think someone that's putting in effort. And I think that the heart behind this really matters more than whether someone would rank you as a 10 or a 1, okay? It's not so much that. It is you're showing your spouse, I still care about you. I still care to be attractive for you. I still care to put in effort in this area. And I'm doing this. I want to be desirable for you. I'm not just forcing you to unconditionally desire me. I think that that's something that a man appreciates.
Well, yeah, I found the list here.
It?
Oh, I appreciate your attractiveness very much. I was just going to read them
why
off.
am I the one saying these actually?
Yeah, so a woman's needs are...
Whoa, we're doing the man's first.
Okay. Oh, so I thought you just did them.
Well, there was a 5th one, isn't there? Oh, and respect or admiration.
Hey, there you go.
It's the 5th one.
Great job. Yeah.
I do better with the men's, honestly, than with the women's because Elisha makes me feel so loved all the time. Genuinely. I don't ever break down like, why am I not feeling loved or whatever? But I do try to break down a few more like, okay, where might I be slacking off in these areas when it comes to loving him?
Well, it's probably why I always feel so loved.
No.
Because that's what you're thinking about all the time.
I need to grow.
Yes, the woman's needs are affection, conversation, honesty and openness, financial commitment, and family commitment.
Okay, so going back to, say those a little bit slower, if you don't mind.
Number 1, affection.
So this is like physical affection outside of sex. So and sometimes it's funny how I don't think this is a need for me. I'm not a physical touch person or whatever, but then we go through really busy seasons and it's like, oh, Elisha isn't like coming up and grabbing me or kissing me or, and then I read this list and I was like, oh, I guess it's a need. Yeah. But I do feel like this is such a big part of our marriage that I didn't really feel a lack until it was honestly like we were out here for 3 weeks in our tent and everything was just so business. I didn't realize like, oh, that was, that's something that really matters. And so anyways, I'm really thankful that for our marriage, that has just been something you've done.
Well, yeah, but you did bring up a good point. We really, I failed on that when we moved out here. It's funny because I feel like we were actually very consistent with sexual intimacy in the midst of all the craziness, which obviously I appreciated and enjoyed. But then this part's just that kind of casual affection that I think we would show to one another when I'd get home from work or, just whatever. You're working in the kitchen and I come hug you or whatever, kiss you. That had gone away and it was convicting because we were out here around the picnic table. We were getting ready to eat. And I think our 5-year-old, was it our 5-year-old?
Yeah.
He said, man, let me remember. He goes, Daddy doesn't really kiss Mommy anymore.
Yeah. And we were both like,
what?
What?
Like, not okay. And so obviously, we changed our ways there and have been making our kids very uncomfortable ever since, but no, hopefully not too uncomfortable. But that was really sobering and convicting because it's like, man, I don't want that to be my kid's perception, obviously. of how we interact. It's like I want to hug her all the time, kiss her, hold her hand, snuggle. And so
And you do. I mean, it was a learning curve. I think we both felt very kind of grimy often while we were first adjusting out here in the tent. There were lots of things that
it was hot.
there were
It was
lots of
sweaty,
adjustments going on. But I do think this is something, maybe if you don't show those public displays of affection in front of your children. This was a conversation we just had at our home group, and different adults now were going around the circle and saying how secure they felt when they saw their dad kiss their mom.
Wow.
And so I just think
Like when they were kids. Yeah.
So don't be shy about that. In homes where the marriages were unideal, it gave the children so much security to be like, oh, wow, good, daddy hugged mommy, or they had a kiss. And so I just think like that's something that's it brings a lot of security to our kids. Obviously not going, making them feel uncomfortable, but also not keeping everything behind closed doors either. Letting them see that physical affection is actually something that really makes our kids feel secure.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think the second one was conversation, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's where this communication piece is coming in. So this is huge for you. Maybe it's huge for your husband, and maybe he doesn't feel understood, or maybe he's fine with the way things are.
Yeah, and I'll say communication plays a role in every single one of these things listed.
It does. But this conversation piece, like maybe the more conversations you're having, the more chances that you're not going to see eye to eye on the conversations, or you're not going to be able to, it's going to bring up more hot topics to communicate, right? Like girls just want to talk. But then if I'm talking to you about all the things I'm thinking about and I feel misunderstood on 4 out of 5,
right,
that's going to be painful, right? Because this is a need that you have. Obviously, yes, you have to communicate through everyone's needs.
Right. Yeah, they're all communication. Yeah. Nice. So conversation. Do you remember the third one?
No.
Yeah, it's another heavy communication one.
Which one?
Honesty and openness.
Oh, honesty and openness. Yeah, you're right. So that plays into our desire for communication. And I think this is something that a lot of guys, this is a classic thing where guys don't understand women, is they think that by keeping stuff from their wives, they're going to protect their wives. And that is a big myth out there. For whatever reason, Satan is populated, where I think just how we can have trouble respecting our husbands, or the communication goes wrong that way, or we think, oh, this is going to be a great way to show him love. And our husbands are like, what? Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure
like
there
this
are
goes the other
times
way.
where men keep things that I'm sure I've done this, where I've kept things from you thinking it was more helpful. But I think when what I'm thinking of like sin, like keeping sin. I don't know if that might be like a way to try to make yourself feel like the hero by saying like, oh, I'm protecting her from letting her know. But I think ultimately it's just you're protecting your own ego, your own image, and just, you're trying to you're hiding your sin. If it's a sin issue, I can see honesty and openness in regards to things that aren't a direct sin, like financial pressures or stress at work, or can you get that? Whatever, some relational discord that there is with your siblings, your adult siblings, you being like that, she doesn't need to know about that, or that's not going to help anything. I could see that being where the husband has that perspective of like, this is actually helping her by not knowing about it, where it probably isn't.
Yeah, I think for the most part. Yeah, I was thinking in direct sin issues, because it's something that I feel like comes up a lot when dealing with spouses not communicating through sin. But so I'm glad you said that, because I do think there's other times where you would think, oh, I'm protecting. But for the most part, I do believe women would like to know. Like, it's so relieving when Elisha will tell me what's really stressing him out. And it makes me think of all the 451 ways I replayed in my head that week what might be stressing him out aren't. It's like, oh, it's so nice to have clarity on what that is, instead of like wondering, is it me? Is it the kids? Is it our life? Like, I'm just going down all these other things because we can tell when our spouses are stressed or not feeling great, I think, for the most part, and maybe guys wish we shared less with them. Like, I didn't need to know all that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. There probably is a little less caring that I have. The fact that I'm just kind of like, I don't know. It probably, denotes that it doesn't matter as much to me. But I want it to, obviously, if it matters to you. Do you remember the last two?
No.
Financial commitment and family commitment.
Oh, okay. So I think when my mom has always taught these, it's been financial support or financial provision and family leadership.
Nice.
And because I think that those terms are just like more,
Like modernized or something?
well, no, like
Wait,
family, it's more descriptive, like family commitment. What is that? You know,
I
like,
think these are more modernized. I
yes.
think your
Oh, yeah,
mom's were
she has
more
the old
direct
school version.
and like, yes.
She has so like financial provision would be the version before
yeah.
the most updated
it's
version,
more
right?
closer to the original text. Yeah.
Yeah.
Closer
So
to the
there's been a
source.
lot of revisions of this book. So now it's not politically correct
this is a
to
far
say
more
that a woman
egalitarian,
would
right.
appreciate, financial provision when she can go out and make her own money and whatever. But it is still something that at our core, regardless of how much a woman would like to be able to, throw her hat in the ring in the public sphere, be able to work, be able to use her gifts that way, I do believe it is peace of mind for every single woman who has the provision taken care of by her husband. I don't see how it's not. Just the way that we're designed to, we have lapses just with childbearing where we have more emotional times, we have more motivated times, we have times where we're physically healing, where we're going through major, like bodily trauma and then healing from that. And it is so much peace of mind to know like our husbands aren't dealing with those things, outside of extenuating circumstances, right? And they are just able to continue marching along and take care of the bedrock foundation for that. And then we can come in when we would like and contribute to the family finances, but just having that foundation taken care of brings so much peace of mind in the home. And the last thing, I think family leadership is something that obviously we all really appreciate. So just considering those things, when you look at them side by side, they don't necessarily line. There's not really overlap in either of those things.
In all of them, like in all 10? Or like...
Yeah, there's not overlap from the woman's needs and the man's needs. It's not like you're meeting both people's needs at the same time.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Man,
like
that's
having
frustrating.
A
that's not very efficient.
Physically attractive husband does not show up as like a woman's top 5 need.
But that wouldn't have anything to do with the wife being attractive to the husband, I guess.
Yeah, but I'm just saying there's not overlap.
But what would be good overlap if, like, the sexual part was more of a need of the woman? That would be nice, right? That would be time. That would save some time. And then same with like, something else that I'm just trying to think of a way to like optimize our time here. Do you think you could change any of your top 5 needs? Or it's like, I feel like both of us, honesty and openness was crucial. It's like, or like conversation. It's like, well, nice. We just had one conversation and both of us. So what you're saying is that's what you're saying. There's not much like overlap where it's like, well, we both just felt like we had our needs met.
Yeah,
in that one
exactly.
event.
And I think it's actually really beautiful the way God designed that is both spouses, in order to have a really unified, vibrant marriage, have to be going outside their comfort zone, venturing into territory that they don't necessarily feel is huge to them. And so the only reason we're choosing to make it a big deal is because it's big for our spouse. And I think that is something that's just a really cool.
It is. It's you're showing love.
It's like blessed,
exactly.
more blessed to give than receive.
Amen.
When we give this way, we are abundantly blessed in return by relationship from our spouse.
Amen.
And so it is a two-way street. Like we are both blessed when one person chooses to go out of their comfort zone.
Yes.
To
No
bless.
man hateth his own flesh, but loveth it, but cherisheth it and nurtureth it. And that we are one flesh, and so there is, like you said, when you have the perspective of two become one, and your needs, it's like they're actually my needs. If they're your needs, then they are my needs. And so when I have, an honest and open conversation or confess something to you, I'm not just like, well, it's good for her, but it's not good for me. It's like, no, this is good for me because no man hateth his own flesh. Like I want to covet and I want to not covet. I want to forget the C. No, not a C word. I was thinking of another C word. I was like, no, it's not none of those. I want to really, I guess, nurture our marriage. And so if that means, any of these things, just showing affection or having a long conversation, those conversation skills, it actually is good for me. So I can call it my needs. These should just be called our needs, not his needs and her needs.
That's actually a good point. It's like, these are our needs.
Yeah.
And together we need to this is probably how we can divvy up who's kind of taking care of what needs and kind of split the difference here. But I love how you frame that. It really is our needs because the marriage unit is not thriving if one person's withering away without those being met. So anyways, in Christ, he can meet all our needs. This isn't saying we should look to our spouse to complete us in that way, but the Bible does talk about a supernatural completion that does happen with this unification of marriage and us two becoming one flesh. And so everything that we do does affect our spouse. So maybe just going to this list, I know we got way off on this, but going to this list and thinking, okay, what are some ways that I could show my spouse I love him in a way that he's going to receive it, in a way that he's going to be understood? And maybe, marriage is all about these bank accounts. And are we withdrawing more than we're depositing? Mm-hmm. And if we've been on a deposit strike, it's really hard when we're broke and we don't have any money and we've over withdrawn from the bank. Yeah. Because everyone is just bankrupt. But someone has to start putting in deposits to build that back
up. And we're all about shared bank accounts. And so you should have a shared bank account and then view it as your bank account when you're putting deposits into it.
There you go.
Even though you're also taking it out of your bank account, you're also putting it back into your bank account.
I like that.
Hopefully just one has a higher yield, right?
Yeah, that's good. Hopefully there's a good investment, a good rate of return.
Yeah, I think that is a good return. You are taking it out of a lower yielding account and putting it into a higher yielding account when you do it for your spouse. That's a fact, actually.
Anyways, but hopefully something we said in there was encouraging. I can't encourage you enough to check out Marriage Maximizer if you haven't already. Elisha and I have gone to many marriage conferences. We've listened to many marriage podcasts. We've read many marriage books. And I could speak for myself, but the way that my parents delight in marriage and speak to marriage and coach marriages is something that I've never experienced from any other marriage. And that's coming from within their home and then also learning from them as a married couple.
Yes. And I'll say this just as we wrap up. And this is just something that like Katie and I both, I think, gravitate towards. And I've already used this line numerous times on our podcast. It's a Dave Ramsey line. You don't take money advice from poor people. And it's not that poor people don't have true things to say about money, right? They have facts that are factually true, but it's their whole worldview around it that you don't really want to catch, right? You don't want to catch their perspective on money. And I think it's kind of the same when it comes to parenting advice and marriage advice. I really want to take marriage advice from people that have a rich marriage, that are rich in relationship. And same thing with parents. I want to take parenting advice from people that have rich fruit in their parenting. It's not that you can't get true advice from people that have a really struggling marriage. There can be true things there to be learned. And same with people that have had a hard time with their children and parenting. There are true things there to be learned. There can be some concerns and warnings that you can heed from those people. But I want the bulk of my encouragement and my exhortation to be coming from people that are rich in their faith, right? That like have an abundant walk with the Lord, that are rich in if I'm going to get marriage advice, I want it to be from people that are rich in their marriage. And I just view your parents as being rich in marriage relationship. And so I'm eager to learn from them. Just as I'm eager to learn from my parents in their marriage and also my parents with their parenting. Like my parents are just abundantly wealthy when it comes to relationship wealth in regards to children and grandchildren. It's like, well, I'll listen. Tell me something, I want to listen. Anyways.
Yeah, it can be really intimidating too. This isn't a copy and paste marriage. So we don't ever come to a marriage resource and think, oh, well, I just want to copy and paste exactly what they're doing, or I want their marriage. Or it's easy for us in relationship coaching, I think, to look at the gap of, okay, well, this is really unattainable for me because they seem to just be crazy about each other. They seem to always be crazy about each other. And that's just not been the case for my husband and I, or my husband is different than that, or I'm different than that. But instead of going in and comparing marriages from someone who's coaching your marriage, going in and just being like, okay, what can I take and apply to our marriage? What can make our marriage better? Where can I get outside my comfort zone? Where have they gotten outside their comfort zone? And how can I learn from that and apply that? Instead of looking to someone in a relationship that's thriving more and just seeing it as a measuring stick to make you feel bad about your own life. That is not the goal. And obviously, your spouse is going to have unique differences But I do think getting coaching in this area, getting insight from people, especially if you didn't grow up with great role models, or if you don't have great resources locally available to you, seek those out, because we're constantly learning from people who are ahead of us. And there's no need to walk 30 years down a really hard path when other people have either done that and learned from it, or have not had to do that because they learned some tricks and tips and have studied scripture and learned these things earlier. It's like, why not learn them now? You know, when we're 8 years married versus when we're 20 years married or 30 years married. Experience doesn't necessarily bring wisdom or joy or pleasure or depth of relationship. It can bring a lot of hurt and brokenness and pain just stacked on top of each other, and wedges and bridges.
Dude, you're right.
It can. Just like time is a great healer, but time also is
It can be a disease.
Yes, it can. So we want to seek the Lord and be wise and seek his wisdom in these areas.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening. We'll talk next time. Bye-bye.